I was able to more or less use the internet better than my professors at the time. So I could do all my research from my dorm room, still make sure I can get out on Wednesday and Thursday nights, in addition to the weekend, and no one was the wiser. So hating this job so much, I bought a book. And started learning and teaching myself how to code, and do basic HTML. At a big, here I am, like 22 years old, at a big, like 20,000 person company of Nabisco. And I was young enough and dumb enough to not realize that there's certain rules, right? That people aren't supposed to sort of go against the grain and go out and do their own thing. What I did on my own time is I built a website. I was able to, use some open source code from the early days of Hot Jobs and Monster and some of the early job boards. And I built a recruiting website for the company, and I did it on my own time. And then I was able to get an audience with the woman who was head of HR, who loved it so much. And she said, "This is amazing. We'd love to have you roll this out. And then we don't need you to work here anymore because you don't have a job." Which I thought she was serious. But then she said, "Well, how do we get you to think about how to sell cookies and crackers and candy over the internet? And if we can do this, or how do we get you to sell that stuff in general?" And again, being the age I was, here you have a very mature marketing organization, people with MBAs from Columbia and Harvard and Penn and you name it. And here's this like 22-year-old kid walking in, and I was like, yeah, no offense, kids don't really care about lifesavers. They don't really need to go online to a website to learn about ingredients, but what kids like is free video games. So somehow I convinced organizationally to get a little bit of money, and we built a really large website, or what became very large, called candystand.com. Again, you guys are probably too young to know about it, but it was what you would call casual games. So really simple, straightforward games like home run derby or mini golf, and all throughout the games was branding and advertising. And so the idea was that kids love free content, especially free high quality content. And we could sort of brand and advertise that experience. It shot off like a rocket. Within 3 or 4 years, it was in the top 100 trafficked websites on the internet. And it became so large that Candy Stand, as well as a brand called Altoids, were sold from Kraft to Wrigley. And it's like, buy these two brands for $4 billion and you get Scott for free. And so I kind of went with it. And when I was at Wrigley, I had the opportunity to build out, at that point, you're at 2007, 2008, and build out a full-scale digital marketing organization for the company. At the time, Candy Stand was growing really, really fast, continuing to grow. We were doing 20 to 30 million unique users a month, and scaling. And to make a very long story short, had the opportunity to actually acquire Candy Stand as a property, which was really strong in terms of traffic, but wasn't monetized. So it wasn't making money. And was able to acquire that business and started a company called Fun Tank. And what we did is used all of the technology and the intellectual property we had built to become pretty early developers in mobile games and iPhone and stuff like that. To make a even further long story short, and I'm getting to how Boll Branch came to be, I sold the company in 2010, and you go from this great high of creating something that somebody likes enough to buy it from you, and within a month, my mom was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and so like my entire life went upside down. I've always been a pretty ambitious guy that goes against the grain on a lot of things, and tends to bet on myself, hyper aggressive and ambitious. And my world got shaken down to its core. And it just kind of goes to show you can think that, sure, a lot of people looked at me and was like, man, look at Scott, he's grown in his career. He's got this great business. He sold this company. Isn't everything great? And I was completely broken inside. And the blessing was that I had an opportunity. My mom hung on for about a year, and I was able to be with her almost every day. And I'll never, that's the single, thing I'm most thankful for as an outcome of the first phase of my career. But here, so I lost my mom. My heart wasn't really in video games anymore. And one of the things that my dad actually had passed away about 2 weeks before I graduated college, also pretty suddenly. And so, here I was about 30 something years old and coming to grips with what mattered to me, and realizing that professional success was one thing, but there are a lot of other things that are important for me in finding joy and bringing joy. And my parents always kind of like instilled with me like this notion of how you're going to leave the world a better place. And while I could convince myself at the time that providing entertainment for people made them happy in spurts, I felt that I developed some skills and could potentially do more. And I'm sure we'll talk about Boll Branch as it goes, but Boll Branch really started as much a social mission as it was a business. I recognize the need to build a business so that, because, at some point, if you're not a business and you're not making money, you're a charity. And I'm a believer, in the old adage of, if you give a man a fish, he eats for a day, but if you teach him how to fish, I tried to take it a step further and give him equity in the pond, right? And try to really see what we can do to channel a business and channel the American consumer to create real impact, and begin to sort of demonstrate the power of the consumer in helping to sort of change the world. So
that was a whole lot of information in there.
I'm sorry.
No, it's awesome, but I don't even know where to start. But I want to go back to I met you when you were in the candy stand.
Yeah.
That part. So you acquired the rights to Candy Stand. Is that what
Correct.
you said? Okay, so
Correct.
that to me is kind of the initial entrepreneurial mindset occurring in your development, or no? Like, when did you go from this Nabisco corporate guy, or you never were the corporate guy?
I think in hindsight, I never was the corporate guy, but what I realized is that it took a lot of time and a lot of effort for the corporate aspect of me to get out. So my dad was a corporate guy. He was a marketing guy by trade. He worked for Colgate and classic brand marketing kind of background. Wore a suit and tie and carried a briefcase every day. And to me, that was what a professional in business did. My view of it was like the 1970s and 80s version of what corporate America was. Everybody had an office and an assistant and a team and a briefcase, and they dressed up and went to meetings. And I'm not taking anything away from my dad. He was amazing and very successful, but that was what my vision was. So I graduated college with the idea of, how am I going to get a classic marketing job at a big company? Because that to me made sense. What I realized, and I think my first experience working on, in the recruiting department, which only lasted about 4 months, but was that I just was not cracked up to sit inside a box. And some people, I think, can take existing process and perfect it and make it work really, really well. And I use my wife, Missy, who's my co-founder at Boll Branch. That is her to a T. She can take something and make it better and make it perfect. I'm much better at taking nothing and turning it into something. And then I need people like Missy to work with me to make it better. And so, as you guys will all see, you're going to learn different things about yourself, and you may not realize you're learning them until much later. This is me, looking back 20, 25 years and telling you the story. At the time, I was like, if I get another damn paper cut, I'm going to shoot myself. Right. And so I got to figure something else to do because I'm bored and my fingers hurt. And so I think at various points in my career, especially within a big company, I always gravitated away from somebody saying, hey, Scott, how would you like to move from the sideshow of digital marketing and work on Oreo, right? The big brand in the middle. And I always was attracted to the idea of building something of future and growing somewhere. And I think that's just the trigger I have in my body as a natural entrepreneur, which I never thought I was an entrepreneur. I really didn't.
So you built the recruiting website, which led to you building Candy Stand, which then, I guess, in your mind, you were like, well, I can do this for other things, which eventually led to Boll Branch.
Yeah, I'll tell you, actually, one of the side projects I had when I was, so Nabisco was bought by Kraft. So call it like 2000, 2001. I was one of a small group of people that Kraft had this brand called Altoids, which I'm sure you all know today, but at the time was a $6-7 million business, sold primarily in Bed Bath & Beyond in Seattle, right? Not much of a business, not much of a platform. And again, this is before people had cell phones. So we looked at that tin and we said, okay, this is something we can do with it. And so myself and 2 other people were given a very small amount of money, and because we asked for it and said, there's something cool. There's a heritage here. Can we try to do something with this? Now, it certainly helps when you have a company like Kraft Foods with a big sales force, but we decided to zig when everyone else was zagging from a marketing standpoint. So the very first thing we did was try to understand where influence and style influence came from. And we started focusing where every mint was talking about how much they freshen their breath and how long they last. We went the route of trying to say, can we build Altoids as a style accessory? So when you pull that out of your pocket, it says something about you. When you fold back the paper and share a mint with somebody, it says something about who you are. So we looked at, we're very intentional about focusing on, for instance, the gay community. We're the very first corporate sponsor of Pride. And again, I had to sit in the CEO's office of Kraft at the time and explain that investing in and engaging in the gay community is not scary and dangerous. So like, just so you know, like, time never ends. There's always old people that don't get it, right? But we took that business to almost $350 million in 4 years. And it was a just tremendous success. And, we focused on really engaging different communities. So again, it was just another example of I always like the challenge and the opportunity. I knew that for me, I wasn't cracked up for Oreo because it already was Milk's favorite cookie, and it already dunked, and it already did all of those things. And yeah, so
then I guess, given your the personal circumstances that you shared with you and your mother's illness and just, I guess, emotional maturity, you decided you wanted to take that skill and maybe have some sort of social impact. Can you share with us the mission of Boll Branch?
Sure. So it's really simple. I have a belief, and I think it's a learned belief, that businesses and brands are meant to serve people. But I believe that somewhere along the way, and maybe since the dawn of time, we as an industry have ignored the fact that it has to serve more people than the consumer. And what if we could create businesses that were architected and built in such a way from the ground up, where everybody that comes into contact with the product, from the person who makes the product to the person who sells the product to the person who buys the product, everybody's life is better as a result. And so I had that notion before I kind of came up with bed sheets or anything like that. And it was in the back of my mind. It didn't take a whole lot of time learning about textiles to realize that there are a lot of really, really bastardized aspects of the textile supply chain, right? The growers are marginalized, the factory workers are marginalized, all for the sake of big box retailers and brands that support big box retailers, who have for generations become incredibly focused on selling the lowest quality product they can for the highest quality price. And if you think about mass market, that is the way the mass market works. And so I don't know if you've seen the movie Jerry Maguire, but it was a little bit of a Jerry Maguire moment, where it's like, what if we went smaller? What if we went more focused? What if we did it the hard way? What would happen? So I actually set out not to start a company, but to write a book. And the thesis was going to be, or the book was about building a textile company. And at every point in that you have to make a decision, making the right decision by people. Where would that end up? What would that cost? What would it be? And I fully expected that you couldn't make a product that was actually going to work economically, right? It would either cost the customer too much or whatever it happened to be. So that's where it started. And kind of 3/4 of the way through, I said, holy cow, there are a few things we can do, and we can be actually competitive in the marketplace.
That is so cool. I never knew that.
Yeah.
I didn't know you were going to write a book. That's very cool.
I know. I still have all my notes from it too. Yeah.
And then as a result of sketching out the book, you were like, no, I'm going to do this as a business. That's really awesome.
Yeah.
I learned something new from an old friend today. So you kind of touched on this a little bit, but what inspired you to adapt the sustainable practices from both a social and environmental perspective?
I'd seen a lot of businesses at that time, brands that you guys have known obviously, like Warby Parker, Tom's, Patagonia, other brands that I thought were looking at the opposite of sort of fast fashion and fast commerce, right? They were being really thoughtful about how they were doing things, but most importantly, I just found it interesting that people with strong business skills were applying them to not simply enrich themselves, but to also try to create some impact. And so that was my starting point, really, was okay, I know what I'm good at. I think I'm pretty good at marketing. I know how to build a website. And when I thought about sheets, like, hey, they're square, I can figure that out. And little did I know how incredibly complicated it was going to end up being. But yeah, so there was a lot of inspiration in terms of trying to create impact, and trying to, with a little bit of a chip on my shoulder, sort of prove something to a whole lot of people that okay, this industry's been around for a really long time. It can be disrupted, not just commercially disrupted, but actually disrupted in a social capacity. And if it works, I thought it had the opportunity to really change the world, and I still do.
Yeah, why sheets? Like, how was what, did Missy have input on that, or was that just you? Or
So I had probably about 15 different business ideas that I've been kicking around over time. And we were in the process of renovating our master bedroom, and we moved from a queen bed to a king bed. And one day Missy came home and she's like, I went to Bloomingdale's, I went to Bed Bath & Beyond. I couldn't figure out what the difference was between something at $80 or $200. So me being the wise ass that I am, I said, you go to bed, give me 15 minutes and I'll figure this super difficult problem that you are clearly occupied with. And of course I was making fun of her at the time, which never actually goes all that well. But I jumped on the internet, and the first thing I read was that the one thing I thought I knew about sheets was that thread count was important, and I found out it was literally marketing, magicry, and nonsense. So that experience as a consumer, I was like, I got up the next morning, I'm like, what if we did bed sheets? But it was one of 50 things I had been thinking about. And as I jumped into it, the hurdle, to be honest with you, of learning how to manufacture. Now, I spent almost 2 years of my life learning the textile trade and how to build a supply chain. But at least at the outset, the idea of like, okay, a king sheet fits, right? I don't have to worry about how to design apparel and things like that. So I thought it was going to be easier. And so that was where it started.
okay, so what challenges do you foresee for companies committed to sustainability
Mhm.
in your industry or not in your
Yeah.
industry, whatever
Well,
you
I
want?
think I think there's two challenges, and it depends on the type of business. For mature and existing businesses, when you choose to pivot your business, right? Let's use Nike as an example because they're doing it, and they're a company I do admire. But Nike has had a whole lot of problems over the years. They continue to have problems over, as time goes along. For Nike, who's a public company, to suddenly say, okay, this t-shirt that we make that we're currently, we're making for $4, we're selling for $20, and has our 80-point gross margin, on our own, without changing demand, we're going to pay $6 for that shirt because we need to be sourcing a better raw material. Extremely difficult to do, because it doesn't matter how virtuous your goals are when you are subject to what Wall Street thinks and what CNBC thinks and everybody else. All they look at is the economics. For somebody like us, right, starting from scratch was a huge advantage because we were able to sort of do things the right way from scratch. We were benefited from the fact that we didn't know anything. And so we had to make a new decision, not change an old decision. But I think one of the biggest challenges is that, and this is something I talked to my team about this morning. You know, there is the greenwashing effect, which I assume you guys know the term greenwashing, right? Which is where you have a lot of folks that are talking about sustainability and maybe only touching the surface. And how does that separate, right? So if I know, I mean, if you buy a set of sheets from Boll Branch, you can flip over the label. There's a number on the back. You call me with that number, and I will show you on Google Earth what farm that cotton came from, where it was ginned, where it was spun, where it was woven, where it was warehoused, and how it got to you. We have full chain of custody on everything.
Wow.
And with no disrespect to like Ralph Lauren or somebody like that, they may talk about their move towards sustainability or that they're using organic cotton, but they don't have any of that, right? And so for the customer, who's to understand the difference between the people that are taking sustainability seriously and the people that are sort of just greenwashing it a little bit? And I think that it's a lot to ask the customer to really pick those things apart. So you've got to find other ways to matter to the customer, but it's very, very difficult.
I agree with that 100%. I know it's not the same thing, but like, you know how when you're buying seafood, there's certain seafood you should, it's like a lot. Like, and
Yeah.
if you have to know that in every single consumer market, it's like you have consumers might have the best of intentions, but it's hard to execute. And I think,
well, it's also for the consumer, right? At the end of the day, would you rather sleep in a sustainable bed or a comfortable bed? Obviously a comfortable bed. With all choices being equal, if one was sustainable, it might break the tie for you, right? But very, very few people are entering the market with a mindset towards sustainability. And so when there's a box to be checked, it doesn't matter if you're doing it in black Sharpie or the thinnest pencil, depending on how serious you are about it, it becomes very difficult for the customer, and none of us can expect the customer to want to take that lead.
I'm just going to pause here for a minute. So students and/or faculty, feel free to put questions in the chat, raise your hand, and Paige, you can help me if I don't see someone's hand is raised. This is super informal. So like, this is your time. So please use this to, if Scott's talking about something that you have a question, please let us know.
And I am an open book. Literally, I will answer any question. You want to know my mortgage payment? I'll tell you. Please don't ask that. But I'm just saying, anything you want to ask, don't feel bad.
So Scott, not to digress, but my husband overheard your intro, and so he wants to talk to you on a separate note. So
Okay.
my entire family is now engaged in this.
Perfect. All he has to do is buy a few sets of sheets, and I'd be glad to chat with them.
I'm already on the website.
Only kidding. I'm only kidding.
No. Thank you, Percheck. I've already been on the website.
What is we have, and I don't want to call any of the students out, but I know there's some students on this call that are very interested in sustainability. And I feel like this generation is a lot better at that than we may have been, Scott.
Mm-hmm.
What is your advice to students that they're either seeking jobs in that sphere, or it's a criteria, they don't want to work for a company that's not sustainable? I actually had a meeting with a student, like trying to place her, and she's like, well, I'm going to ask them about this. I'm like, you go, girl.
Yeah, I think the latter is a real, especially on the heels of COVID. And I understand it. I think like I was looking for more meaning in my life through the work I was doing. I think values-oriented businesses are very much in demand with people at this point. What I would say for anybody that's interested in sustainability is to engage at deeper than surface level in it, learn about it, understand it, not, and actually it's funny because we keep using the word sustainability. I kind of hate the word sustainability because it's a bit of a catch-all, but like, how do we think about environmental justice, right? How do we think about social justice? How do we think about all of the aspects of sustainability that go into it? Find areas that you're passionate about. The beautiful thing about the broader sustainability movement is there's endless opportunities to volunteer, to get involved, and there's endless amounts of information online to learn about it. And so there is what I will tell you about, and I'm sure Gerard can chime in as well. When you think about sustainability, the reason we have a word for it is it's not the normal way things are being done right now. Otherwise, we would just call it the way, right? Like we make our products from organic cotton. If we were making the very same product in the 1930s, it would just be called cotton. But now we have to qualify it as organic cotton because you've got a whole lot of conventional cotton in the marketplace. It's 97.2% of all cotton grown on earth is not organic. So we have to qualify it. So the same thing goes with sustainability and those sorts of things. Think about opportunities. Think about things that bother you, that you say, this should be done differently. Get involved, and then maybe find companies that play in that way. I will tell you, when people approach us and they're like, I know about the cotton trade, I know what you're doing, I think this is really interesting, I could help you in this way, 100% of the time they get hired. Seriously, unless they're just total knuckleheads. But that real honest passion and learning, it goes such a long way.
Looks like we have a question from Julian. Julian, can you unmute yourself, or do I have to do it?
Yeah, no. I got it. I just didn't want background. So first, I'd like to say thank you so much for your time. So I have a question, because you knew what you were doing before you started this business, and you knew pretty much how you wanted it to lay out. And you say you have full control of the chain. Mm-hmm. So my question is, because you didn't have, like you said before, a lot of these companies that operated from an old school style and then switched during the green movement, found that they needed to retool their shops or whatever. You kind of set out with that right from the get. So then, and you're talking with these farmers and from the whole supply chain, do you find yourself micromanaging more, I guess, and regulating farmers when it comes to keeping their practices in check? Because as you said, it comes down to how's that silkworm weaving that, you know what I mean? So
yeah, trust and validate is really important. Now, let me use an example. I mean, it wasn't like I set out and had this grand vision of a plan of how it all worked. The truth is, I read an article that the life expectancy of a cotton farmer in the developing world is 35. And I was 34 or 35 at the time. And that struck with me. So I started with that notion. I said, okay, how do we change that? Who's changing it? Who's doing something about it? That sort of led me to organic cotton, and learning about organic cotton led me to understanding different cooperatives in different environments around the world and how we could make that scale. But I realized early on, I mean, I really hadn't left the US much, like a few family vacations to Mexico. And here I mean, the craziest thing I did in this whole process was sent my entire life savings, literally my entire life savings, wired it to a guy in India that I'd never met before, and prayed 7 months later a boat would show up. So I guess that's one of those points. It's like, if you're not sure you're an entrepreneur, those are the kinds of things you do.
That's the risk.
He's a saint.
Well, she didn't know.
I would have had a heart attack, but it worked out all right. So I guess it's all good.
Yeah, I mean, we got to the point where we had 5 mortgages on our house, and we'd remortgaged our house so many times that I was carrying, I had no income and $5 million in debt and no savings, right? And then people started buying. So yeah, it was crazy. Like, we were on the edge, but I believed in it. I believed it was necessary. But Julian, getting back to your question, it's about discovery and slowing the process down and breaking it into chunks sometimes. I had the benefit of being a little bit older, so I no longer had the Superman thing. Like, I knew I sucked at some stuff. And that also helped because I surrounded myself with folks that had relationships on the ground in India. So for instance, as we were picking our cotton and sourcing it, I could actually monitor. I had somebody that I trusted I was paying to. I actually gave him equity in the company to monitor that chain of custody. When we talked about the social standards at our factories, we actually brought in our own consultants to both architect the process. And then we still, to this day, there are Boll Branch employees on the ground in every factory at all times our products are being made. And it's not that I don't trust our partners over there, but if I'm going to stand up to the consumer and say, this is really different, then I have to know it's really different. And I have to know that our standards are being followed. So yes, we're micromanaging. We're also doing a lot of teaching, and that's what's cool.
So just to piggyback on that, I'm sure I'm stopping someone. Sorry, I'll be quick.
No.
So did you find that you couldn't produce or sell as much as you wanted to because that micromanaging process takes time, and to build the equity takes time? I mean, you don't get that right away.
Well, yeah, the good news, Julian, is not a whole lot of people wanted to buy our products in the beginning. So we had plenty of time to catch up, right? Like,
okay.
The truth is, like, businesses,
well, you built it from nothing, so
yeah, but it's not like this, right? We thought it was like this, but as we look back, it's been more like that, right? And so, but look, still, I mean, we're actually onboarding a brand new factory in Pakistan at the moment, and in the middle of COVID. And I was, at 2:00 this morning, my team and I were on FaceTime with those guys, looking at different things on different lines and talking to them. It never ends, right? There's always something else to optimize, because once you get it working in a certain way, then you got to think about how does it happen at scale. And I could go all day on it, but yeah, it's you have plenty of time. The best time to get your business working is in the beginning, because nobody wants what you're selling, or at least they don't know it yet.
Right.
They want it, they just don't know. We have a bunch of questions in the chat from Elizabeth. What advice would you have for students who would like to start their own sustainable business in the future? What were the most difficult steps when you got started? Something you wish you knew then that you know now?
That's a great question, Elizabeth. I would say the most important thing to think about is to walk in recognizing how little you know, and not to be sort of, you read 3 articles and you feel like you know it, and then you put your blinders on and plow down a path. The nature of any of these types of businesses is that there's more to learn always than meets the eye. So I think that if you're thinking about starting a sustainable business now, I think it's great, and I would do it as a side hustle while you worked for another company and you learned about how things work. And I think that there is no substitution in the world for knowledge and experience. And I think had I started Boll Branch, a few years out of college, it would have failed miserably. So I didn't have the benefit of perspective and a little bit of seasoning. But I think the other thing I would say is find someone that's a mentor, find someone that's done it or done something similar that you can talk to. Like, I cannot tell you how many people helped me at different parts in the journey. This isn't me with I just was a sponge, and I would talk to anybody that would listen and do the same. You're going to start a sustainable business. You know how to get in touch with me. You should email me. You should get in touch and say, hey, Scott, this is what I'm working on specifically. Like, what advice do you have? Or what's this move? Or this is a challenge I've got, and how do I work through it? Because like any kind of entrepreneurship is a team sport.
And by the way, when Scott says get in touch with him, he's not just saying that. And I can speak from
legit.
experience. My son, who's now 24, I think he was in high school.
Yeah, he was in high school.
And you'd have to know my son. He's a little bit, Birdcheck, I think, met him. I think he took
amazing.
He's a little, he marches to his own drum, let's say. Let's put it that way. So unbeknownst to me, like Scott and his wife were over something, and my son must have talked to him and found out what he did and was very interested with this whole candy stand thing. Unbeknownst to me, my son was annoyed with the high school's website that it didn't translate to the phone. I don't even know. And he reached out to Scott and had a meeting with Scott. I didn't even know any of this. I found out after the fact. I was mortified, but like,
I love it though.
My point is, Scott's not just saying that. He if he says contact him, he definitely means it.
Yeah, it's scott@bollandbranch.com, or the easier thing is LinkedIn sometimes, although there's a lot of nonsense in there too. But just don't hesitate.
We have a question from Lily. After having Boll Branch operate for some time, do you have any new sustainable goals or future missions in years to come? What do you hope to see in the world of sustainability?
Wow, another really good question, Lily. Let me give you a real world situation we're running into right now, which is we're starting to get to the size where, so we'll do almost $200 million in sales this year. And we're starting to get to the point where availability of organic cotton of the quality we need is becoming an issue. We're not there yet, but if we look 3, 4, 5 years ahead, and you've got more big brands moving into the space, you start saying, well, there's no room at the end, right? Because you can't just plant an organic seed and call it organic cotton. You need to cultivate the land. It's about a 5-year process. So one of the things that we're trying to do is pilot programs with conventional farmers to help them convert. The problem is that it's more, you can get more money by selling organic cotton as a farmer, but if you have to wait for 5 years, it's sort of, lower yield for those 5 years until you get there. And that's a very difficult thing for somebody whose, family is earning in the hundreds of dollars a year. So we're trying to pilot a program and get more brands involved where you're buying what we call transitional cotton, right? So it's done safely. It's bought to this, it's grown to the same standards as organic cotton, but the soil hasn't reconditioned enough to be certified as organic. So what we can try to do is move demand into the market. It helps us because we get more access to raw materials, and it helps the farmers because they can begin to, experience the substantial health benefits of growing organic cotton. And we can also pay them more as well and begin to help them stabilize. And especially in COVID, we're working right now with our farmers to help them understand how to get vaccines and things like that into their villages, and it's a lot. But so I would say that's one thing. I think the other thing that we all have to look at is ways that we can improve synthetic products. A lot of synthetic products are petroleum based and kind of pretty nasty in the manufacturing process, but ultimately cotton isn't the most sustainable use of land, right? We would rather the land be used for food and things like that. So we've got to find ways that we can get a lot more sustainable about how we're making synthetics. So there are synthetic products that feel just like cotton, and they're amazing, and they're made from trees that can be grown on land that you can't use for anything else. The problem is there's just not a lot of investment coming from the broader community. Folks like Monsanto would much rather sell you seed and most importantly, the chemicals that go on top of the seed than invest in this. So that's one of the things I've been working really hard is to try to get governments locally and globally to be investing in, new technologies and new techniques to have us use the land better and keep more land available for food.
I'm trying to.
But I have a related question, so if you
Sure.
don't mind, I'll just jump in. It's very quick.
Sure.
Yeah.
What about bamboo fabric, Scott?
So the problem with bamboo fabric, it makes a very nice product, but it's not very durable. Certainly for bedding, right? You have to worry about friction on bedding with your people's legs moving and whatnot across a clear expanse. That doesn't happen to the same extent in clothing, or you can make bamboo underwear. You don't care if it pills and gets nasty. So it's something that there are treatments that you can do to bamboo to make it work, but they're highly toxic. So it's something that we're looking at. But I agree. I mean, bamboo is a great example of something that can be grown and cultivated in a very sustainable way. We just, at the end of the day, it comes back to the customer. The customer's got to not be sacrificing anything, or you don't have an idea.
You said something about you're working on, we have a bunch of questions in the chat I want to get to. We only have 20 minutes. I want to respect your time.
I get as much time as
Something
you.
you just mentioned really briefly, that you're working with villages to get vaccine access. Super cool, but it made me think, like, how has this whole pandemic affect, like, your business model is so international and dependent on small farmers. It must have been a challenge.
Yeah, the hardest part for me is not being able to be there and visit, especially for Missy as she's developing and designing products. But look, COVID has been challenging for everybody around the world. Unfortunately, what we're seeing in areas that we're manufacturing is it's at its worst right now, like literally right now as we speak. If you've read a little bit about across India in certain areas, how it's spreading, it's scary. Hospitals are over capacity. And so, where it's a little bit tricky is that we have the might as sort of an American company that's done very well with a commitment to feed a lot of our profits back into those who make our profits possible. So we have recognized that local governments will allow, you can pay for play over there. So everybody in all of our factories over 40 years old is already vaccinated. So our workers and our factories have had minimal disruption, but it's impacting their families. It's impacting their villages. It's impacting places like that. And so it's been a challenge as we think about how best can you support this. We've made sure every day that our factories had to close because of contact tracing or anything like that, we pay all of our workers. Although I will say the Indian government's been phenomenal at supporting their workers, which is candidly not something, and historically they've done all that well. So we're trying to just bridge the economic gap, and we're trying to help bring more education into the villages and into family members. A lot of our workers, they're getting vaccinated. They don't really know why. And we're like, no, we're acquiring from Russia and places like that. And that the level of understanding around the vaccine and COVID, especially as you get into more rural parts of India and Pakistan and Turkey and places like that, is not very high. And that's scary.
That's so wild. Like, here they are needing it, and you're they don't even know why. And they're like, yeah, whatever, just so they can work. And, we're lucky. It makes you think how lucky we are to live where we live and the access we have.
Yeah, but look, I'm super concerned about India right now. I'm very concerned about Africa. I'm concerned about a lot of these places. I think it's a classic case globally where we as Americans are highly advantaged, and we may hate or love our government at different points in time, but in this case, we have been extremely well protected, in the last administration and in this administration. And the fact that we have as much availability to what we have has been, it's been a gift. And I think that, this job has given me so much perspective. This is just another case where the perspective comes in.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
Professor Erdemer has a question. Any general career advice for her students Most will not graduate for another 2 years or so. How can they learn more about themselves? How should they use this time before they fully transition to a full-time career?
Read, and consume content. I'm like, and I know, that sounds like I'm an old man, which I kind of am. But there is no greater teacher in the world than a book that you like. And I'm all for, reading Marvel comics, but the truth is, like, start thinking about not just what your end result is or what you want your end result is, but find things to read that you understand people's story. You understand people's stories. You understand how they think about things, how they act. Read about Bob Iger and how he approaches leadership. Read Simon Sinek and how he approaches leadership. Read Elon Musk and figure out why I'm pretty convinced he's an alien. There's so much out there to read and consume. And the best thing you can do is, I've never met somebody who is well read that can't find a good job. And I really do. That is the read Inc. every day, read Entrepreneur Magazine, read Twitter, consume it, not TikTok, you knuckleheads.
Like my daughter,
Yeah, I know.
Lily and Sophie. This is kind of along the same line. Do you have any advice for college graduates trying to get their first job out of college in this COVID world?
Yeah. I have like a foolproof way to get a good job. Write a kick-ass cover letter. Don't take the same cover letter and paste it in, because everybody that hires people knows when that is done. Think about the company, think about a job, and tell them why you are meant for that job. And your level and rate of success will increase exponentially. Write a cover letter. Apply for jobs after actually reading the whole description. And I'm not patronizing. I swear I'm not patronizing. I'm just giving you the truth. Like, it's hard. It's work. You got to grind at it, but it will work. And if you get a great job, awesome. If you are like me and you don't get a great job, find your way in that organization. Find a door in and take it, and take every day as an opportunity to go somewhere. Don't belittle the work you're doing, but bet on yourself to uncover the opportunity.
That's awesome advice, Scott. And Paige and I appreciate it because it echoes some of the things we often tell our students as well. So we appreciate that. How do you think the pandemic has affected sustainability in businesses, if at all?
I think, I think it has massively catalyzed the consumer and the amount of thought that a consumer puts into their purchases. And we're seeing it everywhere. You can see it in grocery, you can see it in goods and things like that. People have just become, as life slowed down a little bit, people have become much more thoughtful about where and how they spend money, especially your generation. The values that are so clear in your generation around acceptance, of thoughtfulness, of inclusion, and those sorts of things. I don't think those are limited to social impact. Those are carrying through the way people purchase. And I think that your generation's having an impact on all generations. We're seeing people that, listen to conservative talk radio that are now behaving much differently in terms of how they consume. So
I agree. Julian, you have a question?
Yeah, sorry. So I don't know if you mentioned this before, and I know it's not really thought about in terms of sheets, but do you have, or have you thought about like an end of life cycle for your products?
yeah, it's tricky in our category because we are not allowed to sell. Like, if something gets returned and has been used, we have to put a tamper-proof thing. We can't even let it in the factory or in the warehouse.
Oh, wow.
We have to move it out. So we actually donate them to women's shelters primarily in the Boston area. We have a relationship with them for women that need to get out of relationships, and that's something that the team kind of came together on and found an amazing cause. So we would like to get into a refurbishment program. We already have the mechanism set up to do it. It's not terribly easy to do.
Okay.
So, but it's a great question.
Scott, you referred to your team a couple times throughout this talk.
Yeah.
How do you go about assembling your team? What are the qualities you look for?
You've got to deeply care about what we're doing. It has to mean something. and you've got to be a genuinely nice person, because I do not have any time for drama, nonsense, or BS. So I will be honest, like I have one rule, and it is written, excuse my language, but in our handbook, we do not hire assholes. And I have had outstanding performers in the company that are assholes, and I move them out. So that's the first thing. We hire good people, and we hire people that have been demonstrated as good people at various points in their lives and how they choose to spend their time. And you know, we're a high growth, high performance team. So you got to have the skills, right? And so our interview process is a little bit insane. I still meet with every single person we hire, whether it's a retail staff, hourly employee, or, you know, a vice president. I meet with everyone before they join the team. We do test projects. We do a lot to try to, it's kind of like Google, you know, they make you do the layover test. If you can hang out with someone for over 2 hours, they're not that bad. We have our own versions of that, but we as we say, we hire slow, fire fast. If you're not a fit, you're out.
Can I ask a question? Because I was on your website with your open jobs.
Mhm.
And I think this really would be interesting for me and Pat, and I think the students as well. So a lot of your open jobs, the application process is either through LinkedIn or Indeed.
Yeah.
Why Indeed? Do you know?
I think because their technology is built into the applicant tracking software, so we just put it on there, so it's there.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Most of our applications come from LinkedIn. Just like not to scare any of you guys, but we will put a job up and we'll have somewhere between 200 and 300 applicants within a day, maybe 2 days.
Oh, they need to hear that, Scott.
And so now most of those are people that just see a job on LinkedIn and click the apply button because it's really, really easy. If you don't have a cover letter, I don't care if you went to Harvard, you have 16 PhDs, and you could change everything about the world overnight. If you don't write a cover letter, it is deleted. And that is a policy I have in place. I don't care. I don't care if you're someone's cousin or whatever it happens to be. And so that eliminates about 80 to 85% of applicants right off the bat. So just think about that. Nobody writes a cover letter.
Well, Scott, let me ask you something about that, because like, do you ask for a cover letter?
Most jobs we say on there on a bullet point, write a good cover letter.
Okay.
Put in parentheses, note, this is your writing sample. If you don't care to write one, we don't care to review your application.
Okay, because I do counsel, and I think Paige does as well, our students, that if employers don't ask for a cover letter, not to write one. Because I have found there are some employers that, you know, same thing, they get 1,000 applications, they don't want to read 1,000. I think it's great that you do, but
yeah, I can only speak for my company.
Right,
so I
right,
don't really answer that.
Yep. Okay, this is a little off the beaten path question, but that's all right. As a theater's arts major, do you think a sense of normalcy will come back to the theater industry?
It has to, right? Everything's going to come back to some sense of normalcy. The question's when, not if, right? And so every day is a step, I think, towards normal. I don't know a whole lot about the theater industry, but it's got to come back. It's, you know.
I hope so. I was literally going to the theater the night it shut down.
Did you really? Wow.
Yeah, whatever. They gave me my money back, but whatever. What would you change, if anything, to improve Boll Branch?
You know, I try to not spend a lot of time trying to think about things in the past and what we can and can't change, because I can't control it. One of the things that I would like to be able to, look, if I could change anything right now, I'd like to be able to see my team in person. I miss the people terribly. And there is a big part. I talk about this a lot with my own team, and I'd share it with you guys. And I can't underscore this enough. You have to find joy in what you do every day, because if you don't, you will hate that part of your life. And so it's sort of like having a bad spouse or a bad job or a bad place you're living. They're all equal impacts on your life. And so you've got to find all of those things that bring you joy. And I'm not going to try to marriage counsel or relationship counsel anybody on this call. If you want to call me later, I'll bring you in tears. No, but just kidding. But you know, a big part of the joy of this company and starting this company is the people I work with, and I miss it really, really badly.
All right, we have another professor who has joined us that I didn't know was on the call, Dominic Celentano. Dominic, you have a question for Scott?
Yeah, hi, Scott.
Hi, Dom.
I teach entrepreneurship with my other colleague, EJ. And, my background, most of my adult life was working in my family business, and we made frozen foods. And so in my classes, I always try to illustrate the difficulties of a business that makes tangible goods, versus, let's say, digital or software. Is there something you could tell the students that is maybe a big example that you grapple with when you make stuff?
Yeah. Well, and inventory is always a challenge, right? You have, if you think about your balance sheet in your business, right? You've got two things. You've got money and you've got inventory. And you want to make sure you've got enough money to sell that inventory because it costs money to sell something. Now, unlike Dom's business, my business is a little bit simpler because white sheets don't expire and go bad and probably won't kill anybody. When you're dealing with frozen food, you've got to really think about your days of inventory. You don't want to have too much, too little. But again, we have to constantly balance trying to tell the future because we've got a demand forecast. So I got to know 6 months ahead of time how much I think I'm going to sell on that day or those weeks or whatever it happens to be. And I'll give you a real world example of where it's important. We have something called safety stock. So depending on the item, we have an extra 4 weeks to 12 weeks of that in our warehouse on hand. So when I got a call and I'm watching the news, like, hey, these suckers in the Suez Canal, they're really screwed. And then I find out that I have goods on 47 different vessels that were in line and like $15 million worth of goods. And I'm like, oh, shoot, like I'm one of those idiots that's stuck. That's where really good demand forecasting comes in, because if I don't have product to sell, I can't sell anything. It doesn't matter how good my advertising is. And I think, but on the flip side, if you have too much of your cash tied up in inventory, then you don't have enough money to drive your business. So it's I think that to me is the trickiest balance. I don't know, Dom, if you agree or if there's anything else.
Yeah, the inventory, and you're right. In frozen foods, you've got the expiration date, making sure it's at the right temperature. And if it goes above a certain point, you got to dispose of it. So I think you're correct.
Yeah.
Gerard? But before you go, Scott, he's Dominic Celentano ravioli. I'm sure you've had them.
No way. That's you?
That's him.
Well, yeah, that was
So
the business.
humble.
That was
In my
Well, you're
pre-keto
right.
days, I was all over that stuff.
yeah,
Me too.
yeah.
All right, Gerard, your turn.
Yeah, Scott, it's a kind of question you've answered before in a sense, but I just wanted to, is the notion of, typically sustainability is sold on business case versus sustainability case kind of thing. And often that becomes a challenge. And I'm sure you bumped into those challenges along the way. Should I compromise on this versus that? One of my heroes in sustainability is Ray Anderson from Interface Carpets, who seemed to say, I'm not going to compromise on sustainability. I'll find a way to make the business case work or to make the business work. But that's not a compromise. Do you bump into those kinds of things? And what happens as a result?
I don't think we bump into them that often. And the reason I say that is we don't allow ourselves to feel the pressure to make a compromise. There is a certain way of doing things. Now, let's think about it in broad strokes for a second. Textiles in general is a terrible business to be in, right? We have greenhouse emissions. We have a heavy carbon footprint. We use a ton of water. We do a lot. We're using the land for things that are more valuable but less important than things like food and whatnot. So we have to know off the bat that our existence, period, is less good than a lot of other things could be. However, but we are going to do things in the best way we can possibly do within the confines of what we want to produce and feel that consumers need. And so when you start at that point and we don't hold ourselves accountable for perfection. We hold ourselves accountable to making the best choice we can with the choices that we have available, and also not simply kind of accepting the status quo as something that you know, it's this way and it has to be this way and it can't change. So I don't have a lot of pressure to cut a corner from an environmental impact standpoint, or think about how do we, you know, I mean, we pay all of our workers, and we have an independent group determine whether it's a factory worker or farmer, everybody earns at least the living wage. The minimum wage is usually below the living wage. So that means they're at or above the poverty line. And so I think as we think about all of these things, like there are certain areas we will never pay someone less than a living wage. We'll never do any of these different things. And if we would have to do something and it would compromise one of those core beliefs, we just won't do it. So maybe it's similar, but I don't find that comes up a whole lot. There's really no pressure to compromise there.
Thank you, Scott.
Of course, thank you.
Julia, I want to honor Scott's time, so we got to wrap it up. But Julian, if you have a question.
I'm so sorry. This is my last one.
No, it's awesome. I love the participation. I don't mean it that way.
So this is more so on your previous work experience with the candy website that you built up, and you had mentioned that you had the opportunity to purchase like the website, I guess, as a property. I was just wondering if you could go into that a little more. I know it's not kind of.
Yeah, I mean, you know, look, everything in the world is for sale. It's just about what's worth to somebody else and what it's worth to you. So it was a case where I had to do the math and had some partners and some investors, and we had to determine what kind of revenue do we think this business will do. And, you know, we ended up essentially making an offer for it. And it was, you know, it was just like any other acquisition. You know,
but it was a virtual store still.
Yeah, it was not a store, right? It was a gaming website. So it had no revenue. So Wrigley saw, you know, billions of eyeballs a year. They didn't really monetize it that way. We saw an opportunity to monetize it and make money by selling ads and doing those sorts of things. And, you know, we found it was worth more to us than it was to them, and they were happy to let it go.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Does anyone have any more questions? So just like in wrapping up, first, I just want to thank Scott. Scott, I've known Scott and his wife, Missy, I don't know, how old's Lily and Sophie? 15 years.
Yeah.
Our kids were in preschool together, and they're just an amazing family. So on that note, maybe a wrap up is I've had the pleasure of witnessing your family grow, and I've had the pleasure of witnessing what a great job you and Missy do at in your personal life with this amazing professional success. How do you do that? I can't do that. Like, how are you balancing it so well?
I don't know. I'll be honest. I think everything in life is prioritization. And, you know, there's a lot of sacrifice that comes with chasing a dream, which is really what Missy and I are doing, is we're chasing a dream. But we've known from the beginning that it's our dream. Sophie, Brooke, and Haley's dream right now is to have parents that are engaged and all of that. And so we have made a really clear decision that we don't want our dream to get in the way of their childhood. And so we have a few simple things that we do. Number one, if one of us says I'm out, you got to shut down the work talk. Number two, we have dinner as a family at the table every night, which none of my kids want to go to, but I kind of think it's like important. And you know, and I also am very clear with my team, and I extend the same privilege to them. It's about culture, right? So, you know, your kid Cousins, the butterfly in the school play, you go, you don't need to ask permission, you go. And I don't miss a soccer game. I don't miss that stuff. And that means if I need to take it on myself and work at night and do those sorts of things, that's what I do. But you know, you also have to make some sacrifices as well. Like a big aspect of my personal life, my own social life, right? Like I don't see my friends as often as I would like. And that definitely bums me out, but I'd rather me take the hit because I'm chasing my professional dream at the same time I'm supporting my family than anything else. In some way, shape, and form, we figure it all out. But it's, you know, if you love what you're doing and it brings you a lot of joy, it doesn't actually feel like sacrifice.
Thank you so much. Students,
guys.
Professors, faculty, thank you for coming. This is our last event of the semester. So I wish you all the best on your final exams and finishing out this very challenging year. And I'm proud of all of you.
Thank you, Pat.
Thanks for having me,
Thank you,
everybody.
Scott.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.